Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So it's nice to be back at Abhayagiri. I was traveling for just a little bit over a month and returned 2 weeks ago. And it's kind of hard to believe, but when I came back I needed to turn my heater on in my kuti. It was so cold here. So just in a 2-week time, the law of impermanence has shown itself. And this afternoon, right after the meal, I asked Ajahn Sumedho what I should talk about today for the talk, and he said, "Talk about hot." And I thought that's a good subject. And then Seminary Gunawiro was in the room, and he said, "He's saying heart." He was pointing to his chest. So all I heard was hot. So I think there's a Dhamma talk in there somewhere. And it was actually yesterday then. Well, if you haven't been here, if you just arrived today, or yesterday temperatures were 100, and I think I checked this afternoon, it was 111 yesterday, I think was the high, so it's a little bit hot. And kind of reminded me of some teachings I'd heard a long time ago of Larry Rosenberg. I was visiting the Cambridge Insight Meditation Society, and he was in some talk. He was talking about a student complaining about the temperature, so one of the koans was what did the Buddha do when it was hot? He sweat. What did the Buddha do when it was cold? He shivered. And then Larry Rosenberg said, and there's another teaching kind of related to that, which is kill hot, kill cold. That was the teachings. And it's always made an impression on me, hearing those teachings. And I was mentioning this, and then one of the newly ordained monks, Ajahn Sumedho, was telling me that there's a sort of a similar teaching that he heard in Korea, kind of a koan, kind of talking back and forth with the master with the student, and the student asked the question, what do you do when it's so hot? Which is a good question. And the teacher said, go where it's neither hot nor cold. And so the student's kind of thinking about this, and he says, well, where's that? Where is it neither hot nor cold? And the master says, in the midst of hot, in the midst of cold. And I think all three of those are really, kind of valuable teachings to think about it, our situation. And I've actually been quite grateful for how hot it's been this last couple of days. The other morning I gave the reflection of one of the teachings I heard Lumpur Sumedho give when I was over in England, which was be the knower, don't be the owner. And he was in the context he was talking about guilt. He's like, be the knower of guilt, don't be the owner of guilt. And so I've been actually kind of using that as a koan for myself, just sort of in all sort of situations. But I found the heat was it was a wonderful teacher, a wonderful way to bring this up, because it was just so obvious. It's just, you walk outside from your cabin, which was, at least mine was, I think it was yesterday afternoon when it was so hot. Most of the day it was around 80 degrees inside the cabin, which, actually isn't that uncomfortable. But by late afternoon it was, I think, 86, 87. And that's starting to be uncomfortable. That is actually experiencing physical dukkha when the body's just not quite comfortable. And it doesn't have to be suffering, but there is physical discomfort. And but as soon as you open the door and walk outside, especially if you're just wearing a very thin piece of cloth over your left shoulder and your chest, and you walk out and it's 110 degrees, I was really paying attention to there was a physical reaction in the body of, like, this is dangerous. This is, that it wasn't in words, but there was this real contraction, almost like panic in the body when it experiences that extreme of a temperature. And it was like, the initial feeling of, the sun on the skin was burning, and just sort of almost feeling like the skin was wanting to sort of curl up, like like a thin piece of paper in a flame. It was really that kind of visceral that reaction. That was like the very first second or two before any thought came in. And I was really trying to work real hard with that, just really trying to keep that present in the mind of just be the knower. And when I was able to do that, or when I'm able to do that, then I can just experience that. And it's very easy for the mind in a situation like that to jump in and start complaining, oh, why is it this way? Or, why does it have to be this way? But, the quoting Lumpur Sumedho, one of his favorite teachings is, this is the way it is. And so I didn't even have to go there with that phrase, but it was just feeling that initial panic or reaction from the physical body, whatever it was doing, contracting, it was actually just survival. It was a sense of, the body knew that these conditions weren't for its long-term benefit. And, at one level that's okay. And so that is the way it is. That's what was happening in that particular moment. And as soon as I could catch it and just say that, okay, yeah, this, be the knower, just be the experiencer of this, I would notice that, like, the first reaction would be that of the body contracting or doing whatever it was doing, but the mind would have a very similar kind of contraction as well, before even pre-verbal. And if I could, the first verbal thing I could say is, yeah, just be the knower. Then it wouldn't have to go into all the stories of it shouldn't be this way, or getting into the whole stories of the climate's changing, we're all going to die. That's where if you let your mind go that way, that's where it's going to go. And then as Ajahn Amaro always talks about, like all these voices in our head, the kind of committee members. Then of course the climate scientist will jump in with an opinion, and then the politician will jump in with an opinion, and my sarcastic committee member would jump in. For the first thought would be, it's really hot out here. And then another committee member would jump in and say, thank you for sharing. It's like, no one else figured that out without you telling us. Thanks a lot. So, but just as soon as I could catch it, just sort of like, okay, just be the knower of this physical sensation, this heat. It wouldn't have to go into any of that. And there could actually be like a relaxation when the mind wouldn't get tense, the mind wouldn't jump in. The physical dukkha was still there. It was still 110 degrees outside, and the body was needed to protect itself to when I was outside, getting over to the shade of underneath one of the buildings, or spray myself down with water. Those were intelligent, logical things to do. But it didn't have to get into the I don't want this, it shouldn't be this way. Blame somebody, or try to make some sort of plan to get away from this hot California. He was just, this is the way it is. Just be the knower. I like that Korean teaching of, where do you get away from the heat? And so it was right there in the midst of it. That's why I say I was really kind of feeling blessed that it was so hot, that it's really in your face, and you really did have to look at it. And there's so much dukkha, uncomfortableness that we experience, every day that we're maybe not even aware of. It's just like kind of under the surface, or easy to suppress, not to look at. Like you might have a conversation with somebody, and they might just say something a little, weird, that you don't quite understand what they meant by it, and there might be some agitation there, maybe a little fear of, I wonder what they meant by that. But we can just write off as, oh well, they're a good person, I don't need to worry about that. Or just a little irritation in the body, some sort of sense of, just having your body not quite work the way that it has always in the past. And initially there might be a little bit of fear come up, but then we can, push that down, not look at it. But when the temperature was 110 degrees, it was it's very difficult to, if not impossible, to ignore. And so in that sense, it was great, because it did make us look. We did have to be in the midst of it. And if we weren't approaching it with mindfulness, with clear comprehension, then we could get into the suffering, could get into the proliferation, the stories. But if we did have that just an initial mindfulness to be able to really be aware of what was happening, what was the physical reaction, what's the potential for the mind in that situation. If we were mindful, then we could just be in the moment. And then in the next moment, in the next moment, in the next moment, just keeping on top of it, because we can catch it initially, and then due to heedlessness or lack of mindfulness, then we could lose that initial understanding, that initial clarity. And so it's just this continual commitment to being aware, being in the moment, being the knower. And so this kind of that mantra of being the knower, not the owner, was one of the teachings that came up when I was at Amaravati. So I think it was earlier in the year, just probably right around the beginning of the year, if not earlier. But Ajahn Pasno invited several of us to go over to England to be at it was called the International Elders Meeting. So various, all the abbots of the branch monastery, Western branch monasteries of Ajahn Chah met in England, and then many of the senior Siladharas, the nuns, the monks. There were during the we call it the EM, the International Elders Meeting. There were about 120 participants there, from say abbots of monasteries down to the Anagarikas and Anagarikas, and so it was a really large gathering. And so several of us were invited over to that. And the week before that, Lumpur Sumedho gave a retreat. I think it was an 8-day retreat. And I remember when we were talking about or invited, we weren't sure what kind of retreat it was going to be, if it was really would be a retreat, or if it just sort of be a morning reflection and then kind of an open schedule. But several of us went over, and it really did turn out to be a very serious retreat. There were 400 people on the retreat, and unfortunately, Lumpur Sumedho's health wasn't so good, so he only came in the evenings and just gave the Dhamma reflection, and they were very guarding of his time. So I only had 2 minutes with him to really talk to him at all during the entire 2 or 3 weeks that I was there. And but his Dhamma talks I thought were like really clear. He was, I'm not sure if it's he was teaching differently, just more clear, or maybe hopefully maybe my faculties, or I was finally starting to understand what he was talking about. But I remember feeling I was much more really sort of riveted on every word that he was saying when he was talking. And I was talking to his attendant, Ajahn Sumedho, that I asked him, I said, he seems really clear. I said, have you noticed a difference in his teachings? Or is it just me? And he said, well, I think there is more clarity. He's 50 years of teaching and 50 years of looking at the Four Noble Truths and teaching. Like, I've actually gone back and listened to the talks again, and most of them, and I can't hear anything different. That, like, he's not saying anything different than what he's been saying for the last decade or so. But when I was listening to him, and this is what Ajahn Sumedho said, I was listening to him the other night, and I was just like on every word, and it just felt like he was just one sentence away from actually explaining what the unconditioned is, like really being able to explain it. But I knew he couldn't, because it's you can't express it in words. I said, but he was so close. And Ajahn Sumedho said, yeah, he can't describe it, but he can point to it. And that's kind of what it felt like. And I've gone back and listening to these talks, and it's almost like a kind of conservation of words, but he was like pointing at it from different angles and talking about it in terms of sankhara, or talking about it in terms of consciousness, or talking about it in terms of being aware. So I found the entire retreat was just really rewarding. And but even before going over, I remember I went down and we had a meal blessing or a house blessing at someone's house, and Ajahn Pasno, after the meal was over and before we went over to the airport, was just giving a very informal talk. And of course, some of the best Dhamma talks happen when there's not a recording around. But we somehow got on the subject of renunciation and kind of letting go, more about renunciation. And at the very end of it, Ajahn Pasno made some sort of comment that if you're practicing really well, if you are practicing renunciation and letting go, it creates discomfort. There can be a discomfort in that. And I remember everybody in the room was kind of seemed like kind of surprised to hear that, or I wouldn't say disappointed, but it was kind of that's not what you'd expect. Like, if you're practicing well, you'd think you'd be happy, there'd be peace and everything's going to be great. But Ajahn Pasno was pointing to, no, it's like, there can be, even when the practice is going good, it can be, a rub against what we normally experience or what we want, or what our expectations might have been. So that was, I remember the first, I heard that, I remember kind of circling that in my mind, like taking a magic marker and kind of highlighting that. That's an interesting concept to investigate. And so I kind of marked that. And then, and I started noticing as on this trip, I kept hearing, because one thing is when you have this retreat going on, there were many senior monastics there, and a lot of people. Lumpur Sumedho was giving the evening talks, but then there were question and answers in the afternoon, and one of the senior, either Siladharas or senior monks, gave a morning reflection as well, and so lots of other people were talking. And like one time during my travels, I went to visit Harnham Monastery, and just right before the meal, again, one of these really informal situations, Ajahn Meninda was talking to one of the guests and just made the comment that said that he was really looking forward to being old. Looking forward to not just the aging process, but being old. And I could tell, like, the people he was talking to were kind of shocked hearing this. And he explained, he said, yeah, it's like, I know that, when you get old, it takes longer to recover from illnesses, or we're more susceptible to injuries and sicknesses and diseases. That is what normally comes along with age. And he said, but that is the way it is. That is what happens. And he said, but he was like, there are other qualities that can manifest when we're old. It's like just being, if we think, the prime of life is when we're 20 years old, or when we do have that vitality of the body. If we think that that's the ideal, yeah, we will suffer when we get older. But he was pointing out that there is the potential for wisdom, to be there, to be in the midst of hot, be in the midst of cold, to be in the midst of a body that's breaking down. It's like, I think that's part of why it was so powerful being with Lumpur Sumedho, because, his body was definitely starting to pack it in. His eyesight's really bad. He was just watching him. He was very feeble, sort of, moving around, but his mind was very sharp, very clear, and he didn't seem to be suffering about his body breaking down. And I think Ajahn Sumedho was, pointing to the same thing. It's like, real happiness can be in the midst of just being in what's happening. If we have that, sati and sati sampajanya, being mindfulness and clear comprehension, just knowing it, be the knowing, be the knower. And I'm not sure. I'll have to go back and I think it was probably during one of the question or the morning reflections. But I remember writing this one down as soon as then I had a second. 'Cause I didn't want to forget it. But it sounds like something. Well, I'm not sure who said it, but he said, it's like suffering is the appropriate response. And that just like something that felt something true just really jumped out at me as like using that as a mantra. Like so whenever, and I've been thinking about that a lot. Like when I do start to, the mind kicks in and starts complaining or not liking, when it's 110 degrees. And if I catch that, it's like, it's like when the mind is suffering, it's like, this is the appropriate response to the way I was holding that particular situation. If I hold the situation with this attitude, with this view, this is what just happened. I have to own up to, my reaction to whatever happens in the world. Someone says something to me, I say something to somebody. The temperature just happens to be 20 degrees below zero or 110, whatever arises, however I respond to that, if we own that, be the owner of it. If we don't be the owner of it, actually, then suffering arises. So so if you don't own it, it's like, okay, this is absolutely perfect. This is and to me, this saying that, like, this is if I wish to suffer, or because I am suffering, this is the appropriate response to the way I just reacted to that situation. It gives one way, to me, it just gives some, I can laugh about it. Like, it doesn't have to continue to be that way. I can change my attitude. I can see that this is a conditioned reaction. This is a conditioned response, and I can be the owner of this and let go of it, not force it away, but say, that's on me. And then the next moment can be different. So it's like hearing these little phrases from different people, hearing Dhamma from different directions, different perspectives. That was a really wonderful example. Sort of, the suffering is the right response, the correct response. And listening to Lumpur Sumedho, I think if you've ever listened to his Dhamma talks or read his teachings, he's always talking about this is the way it is, or now is the knowing. And of course, he was using those phrases, over and over again. And I think what I kind of, got different this time was, he was describing it in a way that something seemed different to me. Was the trying to think, like the way he was describing it was. He's talking about kind of like in terms of, he started off talking about like knowledge and wisdom, and he's talking about like knowledge is pariyati, is like book knowledge or what we learn in school or what we learn from the suttas. And it was interesting this morning, right before the meal. I think it was a prisoner had written us a letter, and so it was being passed around to all the monastics, and this person was saying that they had a study group that they were, every morning they were getting together and reading suttas and reading the collected teachings of Ajahn Chah, the large section, and they were saying that it was just so valuable to them, especially having the Ajahn Chah collection, because they would, like almost every day, would read some sort of sutta first, and it would inspire them, and they'd feel, like they could, gives them some guidance, gives them some truth to follow, and the inspiration. But it often leave them with many questions. And then they said, it seems invariably they would then read a talk of Ajahn Chah's, which is much more colloquial, kind of much more kind of worldly, how to live these teachings, these experiences. And he said it was almost every day. So like Ajahn Chah would actually explain to them the questions that they had in the sutta. Well, they weren't even trying to match them up. But Lumpur Sumedho was kind of talking about the same thing of like, wisdom is really just the knowing. I mean, he kept coming back to that. Wisdom is the being aware of consciousness, just being, instead of getting lost in that story of why is it 110 degrees, or I don't want it to be this way, but just coming back to the knowing. This is what it feels like in this particular moment. Like right now, it's like, how do we feel? What does it feel like to be in our bodies? Is there an emotion going on for us? Is there boredom? Is there frustration? Is there happiness? Is the body light? Is the body heavy? Is it, are we worried about something in the future, or worried about something we maybe have said or done? It's like you can know that right now in this moment, and so it's, keep coming back to that, and it's like that's wisdom. That's the being aware of what's actually happening to us, and. And so Lumpur Sumedho's spent 50 years contemplating the Four Noble Truths, and so listening to him, his description of how he practiced with this and how he applied that to the here and now, and bringing in awareness and consciousness. I feel like I kind of got this kind of insight, for the this insight that I think all of us we've come to the Dhamma because all of us, I think everybody here in this room, we know dukkha in the sense of that we realize that there's something that's not right. That even if we do have live in a perfect monastery, the community here is extremely harmonious and very helpful, and the food is really good, and there's very little actually to complain about, living in this particular monastery. But it was 110 degrees yesterday. I can still, living in the perfect monastery, I can still suffer. And so, we see that, all of us, or we might have the perfect job, but we realize that, that could end tomorrow. Or have the perfect relationship, but that could end today. And so, even when things are going well, there is that instability, the uncertainty, fear of change, of potential more dukkha. So I think we all come to that, and and so we have that as a little bit of knowledge, and but we also the other extreme that the Buddha experienced was like extreme happiness, the pleasure, the joy, and I think all of us have seen too that that's not the answer. Just trying to indulge in sense pleasures, and so something shifted for me in listening to Rinpoche Sumedho talking, where it's like I think we do kind of we always go between these two extremes. Like we do want to be happy. Like when we do feel the dukkha, we do feel suffering. We want to push that away. We want to not. That's the truth the Buddha is telling us, that's the problem. So it's like, well, if that's the problem, then we should get rid of it. We need to annihilate it, or find some sort of solution to not have to experience that. And so we might try happiness for a while, but we can actually see that that also is impermanent and changing. And so I think what happens is we think that, well, there's just some piece of knowledge that we don't understand. Like there's something's going to happen in meditation, that if I just meditate long enough, or I meditate on the right subject, and if I just get a little bit more proficient, a little bit better at my meditation, if I can just stay mindful just a little bit longer, something's going to change, something's going to happen, and then I will become wise, I will become enlightened. And I just, Rinpoche Sumedho kept, talking around that sort of that same point in different ways. And he just kept coming to, it's like, no, it's like, we're not trying to become anything. We're not trying to become anything. It's be here now. It's be the knower. And so it's like in any moment, and it comes right back to that like the Korean koan. Where is the safety in this world? It's in the midst of the world. Where's the safety, and where is it where it's not hot? It's not hot right in the midst of the hot. And the only way we can do that is to open up to it, to be aware of it. And that's like, Rinpoche Sumedho just keeps using all those kinds of phrases, opening up to it, relaxing into it. He must be interesting to count how many sort of different words he used to try to keep pointing to that same thing. Be here now. Be awake. Like one time he was saying, I've heard this several times, but he said one time he was at a Dhamma school, and they asked him if he could describe the essence of Buddha's teachings in a sentence, and he said, I can say it and tell you in one word: wake up. He said, of course it's a hyphenated word, but wake up, be present to our present moment. So these are just, I feel extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to spend time with Rinpoche Sumedho, even though it was from the 6th row, and listening to his teachings, and he is planning to be here next month, and we don't know what his health is going to be like, and but I think especially for the junior monastics who haven't actually had a chance to spend time with him. I feel really blessed that when I was living in New Zealand, he came and stayed at Vimutti Monastery for a while, and And I got to travel with him to Malaysia, and just during that trip, I got to spend some like real great quality time with him. Almost, it sounds disrespectful, but I was able to kind of be with him almost like two brothers. I kind of get this image. I highly respect him, but he kind of spent some real quality time with me. Just like sit down, and just like two brothers sitting down talking about their life, and and then just utmost respect for him for his teachings. And so, I was a little disappointed I didn't get to make that connection with him when I was at Amaravati. And even when he's coming here, it's like, if he doesn't have that much energy, I'm really hopeful that, if he has enough just to meet half the community members, I really hope it's the junior community members that get to have that chance to connect with him, to, kind of see how someone who's been practicing, been contemplating, the Four Noble Truths for, over half of his life, 2/3 of his life, is to see how that, can affect the personality, his wisdom. Yeah, so it's like I say, I feel really grateful to have had the opportunity to go over to England and to be around all of the various monastics, and I know that that opportunity comes up through generosity to the monastery and the willingness of the community here to allow people to have those opportunities as well. So I'll leave that for our contemplation this evening.